Okay. All right, welcome to the afternoon session. My name's Andrew Dawson. It's my honour to chair this session. We've got 5 speakers, and all of these speakers are speaking in work and experiences that connected with Colin Page. And I know that many of the people in this room have known Colin, and many of you have been privileged enough to work with Colin. And to me, I think one of the reasons why this is really important, as some of you will know and some of you don't know, that unfortunately last year, after a fairly aggressive illness, we lost Colin and he died. And it's a really useful thing to reflect. Toxicology is a very small community, both nationally, even internationally. And in that context, when we lose one of our colleagues, it's actually quite a large impact. And one of the things I've reflected on with Colin is indeed how much impact Colin really has had. Colin, these are some photos. When I first met Colin, which was probably just almost 10 years ago, 2008, he came to Sri Lanka. I never met Colin before, and this was really probably at the start of Colin's career in pursuing clinical toxicology. And you know, I came to realise very quickly that Colin's both a champion as a man, but also really as a researcher. And that experience was, probably intense for Colin, because doing anything around the time, but it was intense for me because I met Colin. I think, you know, we drank a few beers. We laughed a lot. Colin talked with great passion about teaching and toxicology and life and how he viewed stuff. And you know, that photo of Colin with his arms crossed to me is a bit of a classic, apart from the looking at him laugh. And so I reflected back and I thought 10 years ago, and I think this is, to me, this speaks a lot about where Colin was on the trajectory of his career. In less than 10 years, he's had actually a huge impact in clinical toxicology in Queensland, in Australia, and has had an impact globally. So I think it's a real message to all of us as individuals practicing in the field that we do with patients who are often quite marginalised, how much impact we can have as individuals by our direct work, by thinking in our research. And I think this session today, I think it's to remind us both of the enduring impact that individuals can have, and also to reflect on the contribution that Colin has made in a number of different areas. And so to do that, we've got 5 speakers. I'll introduce them each at the start, but I'm going to start with the first speaker, so Catherine Zina Isorati. So Kath has taken over the reins in the leadership of the Queensland Poison Centre, and this was very much something that Colin had really aggressively taken forward, working incredibly hard and selflessly for many, many years to establish a robust foundation for clinical toxicology in that centre. And so Catherine has worked alongside Colin and now is taking things forward, and she's going to speak now on the start of a new era in Queensland poisons. Kath.
Thanks very much for having me, and I am very honoured to be able to speak today about my mentor, Colin, who was also one of my close friends. I don't know why it went backwards. It's like I'm being punished. It's hard to believe that this has all happened in the last 12 years and that he's accomplished so much in such a short amount of time. You know, 12 years ago, Queensland Poisons was in its infancy. There was no dedicated toxicology units in the state. And Queensland Poisons, it was getting bigger year on year. In 2008, there were about 33,000 calls, but there was no local toxicologist who could provide clinical governance, and they were relying on the national roster for clinical toxicologists. So enter Colin. He was an emergency physician who finished his training in 1999 at the Royal Brisbane, and moved across to the PA hospital as an emergency physician in 2001. I first met him as an intern in 2004, and he was one of a handful of emergency physicians who were really passionate and driven and had a lot of enthusiasm for emergency, and certainly influenced me towards initially starting my career in emergency medicine. He was also very clever, and in particular knew that the ED game isn't really one for longevity, not as a one full-time FTE in any case. And so he'd always told me that you needed to sort of diversify and subspecialise, and certainly his thinking was that he wanted to be a clinical toxicologist. And his timing was impeccable because a PA desperately needed a clinical toxicologist. So for those who don't know, the PA Hospital is a tertiary centre in Brisbane, one of the 2 tertiary centres in Brisbane. It covers the south side of Brisbane. It's an adult facility, so no children, which is pretty amazing. Also no gynecology or obstetrics, which is also amazing. But it does certainly look after trauma, transplant for the state. It does the livers and kidneys, and also spinal injuries. It's a 800-bed hospital, although it's not got a huge number of emergency presentations. The acuity is quite high, and certainly about 110,000 inpatient admissions. And so 10 years ago, PA Hospital was doing toxicology really poorly. So this is Health Roundtable data. So this is where a number of hospitals across Australia and New Zealand give certain length of stay figures for different diagnostic related groups. And the X2062 DRG, which is poisonings and the toxic effect of drugs, was the second worst DRG in the hospital in terms of things like length of stay. And in particular, when you compared it to other exemplar hospitals and did a weighted average of what the length of stay should be. So the relative stay index, which is RSI, at PA it was 141%. When you compared all hospitals, so the all hospital weighted average for this diagnosis was more like 86%. So the thinking was if you could bring your relative stay down to that figure, you'd be able to save a certain number of beds. So other than poor old orthopaedics, toxicology was one of the things that was a real issue at PA Hospital. And so there was a bit of a drive, and it was good timing. So when Colin thought that perhaps he could start doing some training, there was a little bit of support from the PA. But he it was all self-driven. He organised it himself. He approached people. He approached the Hunter Tox Service, and they adopted him for a couple of years between 2007 to 2009. And he also was a fellow on the New South Wales Poisons roster over that time. And Andrew mentioned he speaks quite fondly of his time in Sri Lanka. And once he finished, he returned to the PA and just quietly went about making his mark. And what happened over that next 5-year period was from absolutely nothing. He developed a fully fledged toxicology service. And so it had, a 7-day ward round, a 24/7 consultant on call, with that consultant being one person. So he was on call every day for years, absolutely years. He provided a local service, phone consultation to the other hospitals around in Metro South, which quite easily starts to spill out into, pretty much any hospital, certainly all the way up north and even down into New South Wales at times. And he, most importantly, spent a lot of time and a lot of his passion towards teaching, in particular the emergency registrars at the PA Hospital. But he would be at courses, he would be at the odd symposium, he was always there leading, and he was really good at teaching. And over that same 5-year period, he worked as the Honorary Medical Director for Queensland Poisons. And so in this role, he was able to provide, a lot of governance, a lot of clinical governance for the pharmacists who are working there, but also he had a big focus on education, on their continuing education. And as I said, he had this real natural ability to teach, and he was really good at it. In particular, I think being able to pitch his teaching at the appropriate level. He really helped the spies to understand what their advice meant. So he brought them on the ward round so they could see a patient with serotonin toxicities, which just makes it easier to explain it when you're discussing it on the phone. He taught them how to read ECGs so they could understand what they were saying when they were speaking to people about the QT interval. By 2014, things were really starting to take shape. By this stage, he'd created the database for the PA Hospital Tox Service. So this is our very first entry, and you can sort of see, although I did this a week or two back, that we're close to 12,000 entries now, so even since 2014. And he was able to secure dedicated funding to legitimise his role at Queensland Poisons, so he was formally a .5 appointment medical director for Queensland Poisons. With this, he was also able to get some dedicated funding through the PA hospital. So he got a 0.5 FTE for another Clintox consultant, and he took the rather inspired decision to take me on as his fellow. And the hipster on the left, Keith, is our second fellow who joined when Colin did become sick and was able to take his place, and so the two of us sort of battled on. And to say he shaped my career is an understatement. And I know, and I can speak for Keith when I say this, that he was just inspirational. You know, he really made you want to do toxicology. He had a lot of drive and a lot of passion. And the unit worked, which is good. So once we established and had the dedicated unit with the funding, we were able to show that by streamlining the care, we could reduce the length of stay for poison patients with, in that 2-year period, an estimated savings of 2.25 million. And I think the main way we did that was from particularly the long stay patients who went up to the medical wards before, so taking them over, seeing them daily, making sure they were cleared when it was medically appropriate, which was often a lot shorter than previously had happened, but also by making sure in parallel their mental health care was delivered rather than in series. So for people who weren't delirious, that they started their mental health assessment earlier on so that a plan was made by the time the patient was medically cleared. The average length of stay for poison patients was halved after the unit was started, from about 1.8 days down to 0.9 days, and it's been sustained since then. And over that same period, the units exploded, and it's a bit of a field of dreams, if you build it, they will come phenomena. And you can see our first full year in 2015, there were 1,700 odd patients, but last year it's now 2,500 who come through the PA, specifically with toxicological issues, all of which are managed by our team. And I know this talk today is really going to focus on Colin's career, but I do want to briefly mention his family, and they're here with us today, Melanie and Sophie and Matthew. And to all of you, I really want to say thank you for sharing him with us. And we'll remember his legacy because he's left us so much to remember. So he's left us one of the busiest tox units in the country. And certainly for me and for Keith and for Ian, he's really started a future in Queensland toxicology, and we all love him.